My name is Elena, and for 30 years I have lived with a room I never enter. It's the smallest bedroom in my apartment, the one with the low window that catches the afternoon sun and throws it in a bright square across the floorboards. I keep the door closed. Not because there's anything inside, there's nothing inside, but because emptiness has a sound if you listen long enough. It hums like a refrigerator at night, a soft mechanical ache. For decades, that room has been humming with a name I never said out loud. Today I open it. I don't know why. Maybe because I turned 55 last month and birthdays peel something back in you. Maybe because I found an old sweater that still smelled of hospital disinfectant after all these years. Maybe because silence, too, has an expiration date. I twist the cold brass knob and step into the square of light. Dust rises, weightless. The floor creaks as if the apartment wants to say, finally. There is only a chair. Scarred at the arms where I dug my nails in the day I came home from the maternity ward without a baby. I was 25. Chair remembered. So did I. Adoption was the word they used, clean and practical, like moving a houseplant where it would get more sun. You're young, the social worker said gently. You'll have more children. This is the best thing for her. Her. The first and last time anyone gave my daughter a pronoun in my presence. I signed the papers with hands that didn't feel attached to me. Pen left a trench in the page. When I looked up, the social worker called me brave. I have never forgiven her for that. Isid. I place my palms on the grooves time has carved, and I breathe until the sound of the city fades. That's when I notice the envelope slipped under the door at some point this morning, tucked where the baseboard meets the floor. Beige official, my name printed in a merciless sans serif, Elena Moros. My heart does something awkward in my chest, a lurch like a car misfiring. I tear the paper along its throat. Inside there are two things, a letter, typed, careful, from a private search service I hired during a midnight of courage 5 months ago, and a photocopy of a birth certificate I have never seen. I don't touch either for a long time. Instead, I watch the light tilt across the floor, as if time itself is leaning closer to eavesdrop. Finally, I read, "We are writing to confirm that a match has been identified, female, date of birth, placement, updated name on file, current city, Seattle." Seattle feels like a made-up place when you've only ever known the same 2 neighborhoods. My entire adult life has been measured in grocery stores and bus routes and the walk from my salon to the corner where Mr. Alvarez sells oranges out of a crate. Seattle sounds like distance dressed as a promise, rain and glass and bridges. It sounds like somewhere my daughter might have learned to love gray skies because they match the ocean's mood. My daughter. The name on the photocopy is not the one I murmured into the crown of her head in the hospital. "Marina," I whispered because the room smelled like salt and iodine and there was a framed print of a lighthouse on the wall as if someone had tried to warn me without words. Storms come. On the certificate, she is Grace. Grace Walker. I say it aloud, slowly, feeling the shape of it in my mouth. Grace. A word that suggests forgiveness before the apology. A word I've never felt entitled to. There is an email address in the letter. A suggestion that if I wish to make contact, I should write first, keep it short, do not mention the adoption immediately, do not mention the hospital, do not mention the way you have built a shrine out of absence. Keep it simple, they advise. Hello, I believe we may be related. Would you be open to talking? I laugh, a dry sound in the empty room, because they don't understand that simplicity abandoned me the day I handed my daughter to a nurse and watched the nurse become gravity's accomplice. But maybe I can pretend. Back in the kitchen, I open my old laptop like a hinged scar. The screen blooms to life, patient, indifferent. I type the email address into a new message and rest my fingers on the keys. Cursor blinks in a steady 1-2 cadence, a small pulse. For a moment I imagine a different world, one where I never signed those papers, one where the father stayed, one where money and fear didn't outweigh my spine. In that world, I would be writing to ask what she wants for dinner when she visits, whether she still takes her coffee too sweet, if the sweater I knitted is long enough at the sleeves. In that world, I wouldn't be counting commas like landmines. Hello, I write. My name is Elena. I believe we may be connected. Would you be open to a conversation? I read it 5 times. I delete connected and type related, then delete related and type connected again. Both are true and neither is safe. At last I choose connected because it feels like a bridge you can cross in the dark without falling. I sign it with just my first name because if she wants more, she'll ask. When I press send, the apartment exhales. The hum returns. Emptiness is not silent. It fills itself with everything you don't say. I wash the single coffee cup in the sink. I wipe the counter that does not need wiping. I consider calling my sister and tell her nothing. She has always believed that holding a thing too tightly will break it. I have evidence to the contrary. Sometimes letting go breaks you worse. 2:17 p.m. and my laptop pings. It is not an answer. It is a message from the same address, automatic and efficient. Your email has been received. Beneath it, a signature line blooms, Grace Walker Community Outreach Coordinator, followed by a phone number. I stare at the word Grace again until it flickers and becomes just letters, then reassembles into the person wearing them. Outreach. She is a person who reaches out. The irony is tender enough to bruise. I do not call. I sit in the hum. I make soup and don't eat it. I try to read a novel about a woman renovating a cottage and every hammer blow sounds like a heartbeat slipping out of time. At 9:03 p.m. the second email arrives. Hi Elena. Thank you for writing. I've wondered for a long time whether you might exist in more than my imagination. I'm open to a conversation. Grace. I press a hand to my mouth. I don't realize I'm crying until my palm is wet and my cheeks are cold. I do not deserve this calm sentence. I do not deserve the kindness of open. In the little room, the dust has settled. The square of light has migrated off the floor and onto the wall, a soft, glowing rectangle that looks like a door. For the first time in 30 years, I believe it might lead somewhere. Tomorrow, I tell the chair. Tomorrow, I will answer. Chair says nothing. But the hum changes. Or maybe I do. I didn't sleep that night. It wasn't the kind of restless where you toss and turn, curse the heat, and eventually drift off. It was the kind of wakefulness that holds your eyelids open with invisible fingers, whispering, "Don't you dare miss a second of this." Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her name. Grace Walker. It looked both foreign and familiar, like a street you've never walked down but somehow know will lead home. By 5 a.m., I was pacing the apartment, making tea I didn't drink, folding laundry that had already been folded. My mind kept looping around questions I didn't know if I had the right to ask. Does she like music? Did she ever play sports? Has she been happy? Has she been safe? The last question was the one that cut deepest. Because in all my imagined reunions over the years, the thing that haunted me wasn't whether she'd forgive me. It was whether she had ever forgiven the world for letting her go. 8 a.m. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. Cursor blinked again, patient as ever, waiting for me to shape the next step. I started typing. Grace, thank you for writing back. I have wanted to find you for a long time. There are things I'd like to tell you, and many more I'd like to hear from you. Would you be willing to talk over the phone or meet in person? Elena. I hovered over the send button for so long my tea went cold twice. When I finally clicked it, I almost expected the world to change color. It didn't. But my pulse did something uneven again. Her reply came faster than I'd dared to hope. 20 minutes later. Hi, Elena. I'd be open to a phone call. Tomorrow evening? Here's my number. Grace. Tomorrow. That word rolled through my chest like a small earthquake. Tomorrow I would hear her voice for the first time in 30 years. The next 24 hours were a blur of half-finished chores and too much coffee. I cleaned the little room until the floor shone, though I had no idea why. Maybe because I wanted some corner of my life to be spotless before she stepped into it, even if only in words. I kept imagining how she might sound. Would she have my low, husky voice? Would she speak quickly like her father, filling every silence? Or would she take her time, deliberate, careful? By the time evening came, I'd rehearsed a dozen opening lines and rejected them all. At exactly 7 p.m., I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, and dialed. It rang twice. Then, "Hello? This is Grace." The sound of her voice hit me like the first warm breeze in April, unexpected, gentle, but strong enough to move something inside me. "Hi, Grace. This is Elena." A pause. Not an awkward one, more like the kind of pause you take when you're opening a gift slowly, savoring the moment. "Hi, Elena," she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually call." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But here we are." She laughed softly, and it was such a beautiful, unguarded sound that I found myself smiling. I hadn't smiled like that in a long time. We started with easy things where we lived what we did for work. She told me she worked for a nonprofit that helped place foster kids into permanent homes. I almost dropped the phone. You help kids find families?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I guess you could say I know what it feels like to wonder where you belong." I swallowed hard, but I didn't push yet. I remembered the search agency's warning. Do not unload your story all at once. Let her guide the pace. Instead, I asked about her city, her favorite coffee shop, the books she loved. We laughed about how neither of us could cook without setting off the smoke alarm. And slowly, without realizing it, I began to hear my own speech patterns in hers. The same habit of dropping your voice at the end of a sentence, the same careful pause before saying something important. After about an hour, there was a silence, but this time it was full, not empty. "I know who you are," she said finally. I froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she took a deep breath, "I've always known I was adopted. My parents never hid it from me. They told me you were young and that you made a hard choice. They never made you a villain in my story." I closed my eyes. Relief and grief arrived together, two waves crashing from opposite directions. "I was scared you'd hate me," I whispered. "I don't," she said simply. "I've wondered about you my whole life. And now you're real." We talked for another 20 minutes until her voice grew tired. Before we hung up, she said, "I think I'd like to meet you, Elena. In person." I nearly dropped the phone again. "When?" I asked. "Soon," she said. "But on my terms. Is that okay?" "Yes," I breathed. "Anything." When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the wall, listening to the hum of the little room behind me. For the first time, it didn't sound like emptiness. It sounded like possibility. Tomorrow had come and gone, and brought me something I thought I'd lost forever. 2 weeks passed between that phone call and the day I boarded a plane to Seattle. Grace said she needed time to arrange things, and though my curiosity clawed at me, I didn't push. After all, I'd waited 30 years. What were 14 more days? I spent them imagining every possible scenario. In some versions, she ran toward me in the airport, all tears and open arms. In others, she stood at a distance, evaluating, deciding if I was worth her time. I prepared for both, though my heart secretly prayed for the first. The morning of my flight, I stood in front of the mirror with 3 different scarves, trying to remember what colors I'd once thought suited me. Did she like bright things? Or should I wear something muted so I wouldn't overwhelm her? I finally chose a soft gray one. Neutral. Safe. When the plane landed, Seattle greeted me with drizzle. The air smelled of salt and rain, and the airport was full of people hurrying past with that determined gait of those who know exactly where they're going. I moved slower, scanning faces. Then I saw her. Grace stood near a coffee kiosk, holding a paper cup in both hands. She was taller than I'd pictured, her dark hair pulled into a low bun. There was something in the shape of her shoulders, slightly forward as if protecting her heart, that made my breath catch. She saw me at the same time. Her lips parted, but she didn't move right away. I walked toward her, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I stopped in front of her, I realized I was shaking. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she echoed. We just looked at each other for a long moment. I searched her face for traces of the baby I'd held for 2 days in the hospital. There, in the curve of her cheekbone, the slight tilt of her smile. "Kaniukio?" I asked. She nodded. It was a careful hug at first, like two strangers testing the water before wading in. But then she exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath, and her arms tightened around me. I felt something loosen inside my chest, something that had been locked for decades. We spent the day walking through Pike Place Market, Grace pointing out little shops she liked. She bought us fresh flowers. "For your hotel room," she said, smiling, and we had lunch at a small seafood place with fogged-up windows. Conversation moved in gentle waves. Sometimes we talked about safe topics, weather, books, food. Other times we drifted closer to the shoreline of the real story. Over chowder, she said, My adoptive mom, told me you were 19 when you had me." 25, I corrected softly. But I felt 19. I was scared. Alone. "Your father, he wasn't in the picture." She nodded, sipping her soup. "They never badmouthed you." But I could tell they were guessing about parts of the story. "I wish I could tell you it was all noble sacrifice," I said, my voice trembling. But I was also weak. I thought I was doing the best thing for you, but I was also doing the easiest thing for me. Grace looked at me for a long moment. "I don't need you to rewrite the past for me. I just need the truth." I nodded. "You'll get it. All of it. When you're ready." By the end of the afternoon, the city lights began to glow against the gray sky. We walked along the waterfront, the sound of gulls overhead. Grace stopped at the railing, looking out at the water. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you'd kept me?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "It's a dangerous game, though. The what-ifs can eat you alive." She gave a small smile. "Maybe. But sometimes they can also heal you." I didn't fully understand then what she meant. I would later. Back at my hotel, I closed the door and leaned against it, replaying every moment of the day. My scarf still smelled faintly of her shampoo. For the first time in 30 years, I fell asleep without imagining what my daughter might look like, because now I knew. Tomorrow we were meeting again. And I had no idea that this second day would bring a revelation that would change everything I thought I knew about her life. The next morning, Grace suggested we meet at a small cafe near her apartment. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window with a steaming cup in front of her. The light caught the side of her face, and for a second I saw myself at her age. The resemblance startled me, not in a mirror image way, but in the subtle gestures, the way she tilted her head when listening, the way she wrapped both hands around her cup. She smiled when she saw me, but there was something tight in it, as though she'd been rehearsing what she wanted to say. "I thought maybe today we could talk about more personal things," she said once I'd settled across from her. "Whatever you want," I assured her, though my stomach tensed. She took a sip of her coffee, then set it down with deliberate care. "My parents were good people," she began. "They gave me a stable home, opportunities, and education. But it wasn't always easy." I waited. "They couldn't have children of their own," she continued. "They adopted me when I was 2 weeks old. For a long time I felt special. Chosen. But when I hit my teenage years, things shifted. My mom, she got sick. Depression. My dad worked long hours. The house got quiet in a way that felt heavy." I nodded slowly, picturing her in that silence, a teenage girl wondering if her existence was too much for the people who'd chosen her. "I acted out," she admitted. "Skipped school. Stayed out late. I think part of me was testing them, seeing if they'd still want me when I wasn't easy to love." "Did they?" I asked gently. "They tried," she said. "But there were cracks. Words said in anger. My mom once told me she wondered if you had been like me at my age. If you'd given up on me because I was difficult. Her voice wavered on that last sentence. Grace, my own voice caught. That couldn't be further from the truth. You weren't given up because you were difficult. You were a baby. You had no fault in it. It was me, my circumstances, my fear, my lack of courage. She looked at me, eyes glossy. I know that now. But when you're 15, you hear something like that and it digs in deep. I started to believe I was disposable. That word lodged in me like a splinter. Disposable. I thought of the adoption papers, the way they'd been folded and slid across the desk to me, as if they were nothing more than a formality. I thought of the chair in the little room and the hum that had followed me for decades. You've never been disposable, I said firmly. Not to me. Not for a single second. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She slid it across the table. I kept this since I was 13, she said. Letters I wrote to you. I never knew if you'd see them, but I needed a place to put the questions. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was uneven at first, then steadier over the years. The earliest entries were short. Do you think about me? What's your favorite color? Do you know my birthday? Later ones were heavier. Why didn't you want me? Would you recognize me if we passed on the street? Am I anything like you? By the time I reached the last page, my vision blurred. Grace, I whispered. I would have answered every one of these if I'd known. I believe you, she said softly. And maybe now you can. We spent the rest of the morning going through the notebook, one question at a time. Some answers made her laugh, like how my favorite color had changed 3 times over the years, and some brought us both to tears. When we finally stepped out into the drizzle, I felt something different between us. Not quite trust yet, but the scaffolding of it. The first beams in place. As we walked toward her apartment, she stopped suddenly. There's something else I need to tell you, she said. My heart skipped. What is it? She hesitated then. It's about someone who's been looking for you, too. I froze. Someone? She nodded. Someone from your past. Someone connected to my adoption. The rain seemed to pause around us. In that moment, I had no idea that what she was about to reveal would turn this reunion into something much more complicated than I'd ever imagined. The drizzle had turned into a fine mist, hanging in the air like unspoken words. Grace stood there on the sidewalk, her hands shoved into her coat pockets, eyes fixed on some invisible point over my shoulder. Who? I asked again, quieter this time. She shifted her weight, then said, A man named Daniel. The name meant nothing to me at first, until she added, He says he knew you. Back then. When you were pregnant. I felt my stomach drop. There were only a handful of people who knew about the pregnancy before I went to the hospital, and fewer still who stayed in my life long enough to remember. Daniel, I repeated slowly. Daniel who? I don't know his last name, Grace admitted. He reached out to me on social media about a month before you emailed me. Said he'd been looking for you for years. That he was a friend. She paused. Or maybe more than a friend. I stared at her, the fog and city noise blurring at the edges. We walked to a small park nearby and sat on a damp bench under a maple tree. The air smelled of wet earth and rain. What else did he say? I asked, keeping my voice steady. That he was there the day you signed the adoption papers. That he wanted to take me himself, but it wasn't possible. And that he's always regretted letting you walk out of that building alone. I closed my eyes. The image came back immediately, a narrow hallway lined with scuffed chairs, the sound of someone pacing just out of sight. I had been too numb to register faces that day. But there had been someone who'd stopped me at the door, who'd touched my arm and said, You don't have to do this. Back then, I couldn't even look at him. I mumbled something about having no choice and walked past. And I never saw him again. Why is he looking for me now? I asked. Grace hesitated. He said he has something you should know. Something about why the adoption happened the way it did. That sentence lodged in my mind like a hook. I'd always believed the story was simple. I was alone, broke, scared, and pressured by the social worker into signing away my rights. But if there was more, do you believe him? I asked. I don't know, Grace admitted. But he seemed sincere. He asked if I could give you his phone number. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was damp at the edges from the mist, but the numbers were still legible. I took it without speaking. Paper felt heavier than it should have. That night in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed with the note in my hand. The city lights flickered beyond the rain-streaked window. I must have dialed half the number before hanging up 3 times. Finally, just after midnight, I let the call go through. 2 rings. Then a voice, deeper now, older, but with a thread of familiarity I couldn't place. Elena. Yes, I said. A long pause and then, it's Daniel. I've been waiting 30 years for you to call me. We spoke for nearly an hour. First, it was clumsy, circling each other with careful words, filling in decades of silence. Then he got to the point. I need you to know, he said, that the decision to give Grace up wasn't entirely yours. My breath caught. What are you talking about? I signed the papers. Yes, he said, but you didn't know the whole truth. There were other hands pushing that pen. People who didn't want you to keep her, and not for the reasons they told you. I gripped the phone tighter. Who? I think you already suspect, Daniel said quietly. And I can prove it. But we should talk in person. I didn't sleep after that call. My mind kept rewinding, re-examining every memory of those weeks before the birth. There had been strange moments, conversations that ended when I walked into a room, letters from the adoption agency that arrived already opened, friends who suddenly stopped visiting. Now it seemed those weren't just coincidences. In the morning, I called Grace. Would you meet me later today? I asked. Of course, she said. Why? Because, I told her, we're going to see Daniel. And I think the story of your adoption is about to change, for both of us. Daniel chose a diner just outside the city, the kind with cracked red vinyl booths and a bell over the door that jingled when you walk in. Smelled like bacon grease and coffee that had been sitting on the warmer since morning. I arrived with Grace right at noon. He was already there, sitting in the corner booth with his hands wrapped around a mug. When he looked up, I recognized him instantly, not because he looked the same, but because something in his eyes hadn't changed. That same steady, searching gaze from 30 years ago. Elena, he said, standing halfway before I motioned for him to sit. This is Grace, I said. Grace slid in beside me, her expression cautious but curious. Daniel nodded to her with a warmth that seemed genuine. We ordered coffee, though my hands were too unsteady to lift the cup when it arrived. Finally, Daniel leaned forward. I'm just going to say it, he began. You didn't lose Grace because you were unfit or because you couldn't provide for her. You lost her because someone made sure you couldn't keep her. I frowned. Who? Your mother, he said. The words hit me so hard I almost laughed, the absurd, gut-punch kind of laugh that doesn't escape your throat. My mother. I repeated. He nodded. I was there. I was trying to help you. I had a small apartment then, enough to get by, and I told you I'd take you in. We'd raise her together, or at least until you could stand on your own. But your mother found out and went to the agency before you could. She told them you were unstable, that you had no support, and that I was unsuitable. Grace's eyes widened. Why would she do that? Daniel's mouth tightened. because she thought a child would ruin your life. She was convinced you'd end up stuck, poor, and bitter. She wanted to save you from that, in her words. And she believed adoption was the only answer, not because of love for the baby, but because of her idea of what your life should be. I sat there, stunned. The air in the diner felt suddenly heavier, like every breath had to be pulled through water. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that all these years I thought I was alone in this, but really my own mother made sure I had no choice?" "Yes," Daniel said. "And she never told you because she thought you'd thank her one day. But I knew you wouldn't. I tried to find you, but you disappeared after you left the city." I rubbed my temples, the memories rushing back. My mother's insistence that she knew people who could help, the way she kept pushing me to sign the papers quickly before you change your mind. It had felt like pressure then. Now it felt like betrayal. Grace broke the silence. "So, all this time you thought my adoption was Elena's decision alone. And you thought she didn't want you." I turned to her. "Grace, I wanted you. I just didn't fight hard enough once I thought no one was on my side. But if I'd known Daniel had offered, if I'd known my own mother had lied to stop it." My voice cracked, and I couldn't finish. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a thin folder. He slid it across the table to me. "Proof," he said. "Copies of the agency's notes. I had a friend who worked there at the time. She kept them for me. Your mother's name is in there, her statements, her phone calls, all documented." I opened the folder and saw it in black and white. Client's mother reports she is unfit for parenting, has no stable residence, and has shown emotional instability during pregnancy. Mother strongly advises immediate placement for adoption. Notes indicate client's associate, Daniel R., is an unsuitable guardian due to financial limitations. The rest of lunch passed in fragments, Daniel filling in pieces I'd never known, Grace asking questions that made my chest ache. By the time we stood to leave, the rain had started again, tapping on the diner's big front window. As we walked to the parking lot, Grace slipped her arm through mine. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For all the years we both believed the wrong story." Her words settled somewhere deep in me, heavier than forgiveness but lighter than blame. That night, alone in my hotel room, I read through the folder again. Each line was like a small explosion in my chest. I'd lost 30 years with my daughter, not just to fear but to someone else's interference. And now I knew I couldn't just leave the truth buried. It was time to go home and face the one person who still had answers to give, my mother. I booked an early flight home the next morning. The rain in Seattle seemed reluctant to let me leave, clinging to the plane windows as we taxied down the runway. Grace had hugged me at the curb with a lingering squeeze that told me she understood why I had to go. "You'll call me after," she'd said. "Yes," I promised. No matter what happens. My mother still lived in the same narrow brick house where I'd grown up, the one with peeling green shutters and a porch light that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. When I pulled up, I saw her through the front window, sitting in her recliner with a blanket over her knees, the TV flashing in her glasses. For a moment, I just sat in my car, watching her silhouette. I was 55 years old, but my hands gripped the steering wheel like a teenager about to deliver bad news. Finally, I got out, folder in hand. She opened the door before I knocked. "Elena," she said, surprised. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "I didn't want to give you time to prepare," I replied. Her brows knitted. "Prepare for what?" "For this," I said, holding up the folder. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd served me soup on the day I told her I was pregnant. The same table where she'd said, "I know people who can help." I laid the papers in front of her. She adjusted her glasses and began to read. Her eyes flicked over the lines, and I saw the exact moment she realized what they were. "You talked to him," she said finally. "Daniel?" "Yes," I said. "And he told me everything. How you went behind my back. How you told the agency I was unstable, that I had no place to go. that he wasn't suitable. You made sure I had no choice but to sign those papers." She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "I did what I had to do." "No," I said sharply. "You did what you thought was right. For you. Not for me. Not for her." She didn't flinch. "You were young, scared, and stubborn. That man couldn't have supported you. You would have ended up in a run-down apartment with a baby you couldn't afford, and I wasn't going to watch you throw your life away." My voice rose. "So you threw away hers instead? 30 years, Mom. 30 years I could have had with my daughter." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "You have her now." "That's not the point," I snapped. "The point is, you took away my choice. You made me believe no one wanted to help me." For the first time, something cracked in her expression. She looked away, her fingers tightening on the edge of the table. "I thought you'd thank me one day," she said softly. "Thank you." My laugh was bitter. "For lying? For making me believe I abandoned my child because I wasn't strong enough? I've carried that shame every single day." She shook her head, but there was no conviction in it. "I didn't think you'd ever forgive me if I told you." "You were right," I said. "I don't." Silence settled between us, thick and cold. I stood, gathering the folder. "I came here to hear the truth from you. Now I have it. We don't need to see each other again." Her voice followed me to the door. "Elena, I was trying to save you." I turned back. "No. You were trying to control me. And in the process, you stole something we can never get back." Then I left, the sound of the door closing behind me sharper than any argument we'd ever had. Back in my car, I sat for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. There was no satisfaction in what had just happened. No neat sense of justice. Just an empty space where my trust in her used to be. But there was something else too, a strange lightness, as if I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. I started the engine. There was someone waiting for me now, someone who deserved to know exactly what I'd learned. Grace. I called Grace from the airport before my flight. She picked up on the first ring. "Well, it's true," I said. "Everything Daniel told us. My mother, she made sure I had no way to keep you. She thought she was saving me from a mistake. But she never gave me a choice." Grace was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Elena. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry you had to carry that alone." "I'm sorry you had to grow up believing I didn't want you," I said. Her voice softened. "I think part of me always hoped that wasn't the whole story. Now I know it wasn't." When I landed, Grace offered to pick me up, but I told her I'd meet her the next day. I needed one night to process everything before I saw her face again. The following afternoon, we met at a quiet park near her apartment. The leaves had started to turn, flashes of orange and red against the gray Seattle sky. I told her everything, every word my mother had said, every line in those agency notes. I didn't hold anything back. Grace listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took a long breath. "You can't change what happened," she said. "But we have the rest of our lives to decide what happens next." Her words settled deep inside me. For 30 years, I'd been looking backward. Maybe it was time to start looking forward. We began meeting every week. Sometimes we went for coffee, sometimes we just walked along the waterfront. We didn't try to cram 30 years into every conversation, that would have been impossible. Instead, we let the connection grow in small, steady steps. I learned that Grace loved old black and white movies, hated spicy food, and had an obsession with thrift store sweaters. She learned that I couldn't start my day without tea, that I'd once dreamed of being a travel photographer, and that I had a laugh I'd forgotten about until she coaxed it out of me. There were awkward moments, too. Times when we didn't know how to bridge the years between us. But there was always an unspoken agreement to try again the next time. Daniel stayed in touch as well. He and Grace met separately once, which I encouraged. He had been part of her origin story too, and she deserved to hear his perspective without me in the middle. One afternoon, she called me after seeing him. "He's kind," she said, "and he clearly cared about you. I'm glad he told us what happened." So was I. Without him, the truth might have stayed buried forever. It was Grace's idea to visit the little room in my apartment. I'd told her about it, the empty space I'd kept closed for decades, the chair that had been there since the day I came home without her. When she walked in, she went straight to the chair and ran her hand along the worn armrest. "This is where you sat," she said, not as a question. "Yes," I replied. She turned to me with a smile that was gentle but certain. "It doesn't have to be empty anymore." We spent the afternoon filling it, not with furniture but with memories. She brought framed photos from her life, and I added a few from mine. We stacked books we both loved on the floor, put a small plant in the window. The room felt warmer before we were even done. A few weeks later, Grace invited me to Thanksgiving at her home. It was just her, a few close friends, and me, no grand speeches, no forced sentimentality. But at one point, she raised her glass and said, "To finding the people you thought you'd lost." Everyone clinked glasses. I swallowed around the lump in my throat. Looking back now, I know we'll never have the kind of relationship that comes from a lifetime together. We can't rewrite the first 30 years. But we can write the rest, and that's more than I ever thought I'd have. The hum in the little room is gone. When I open the door now, it's not emptiness that greets me. It's Grace's laugh, the rustle of pages, the scent of her favorite flowers on the windowsill. And after 30 years, I can finally say it without hesitation. I didn't lose my daughter. I found her,